Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. My name is Lucinda Vakura, Senior Director of Business Development and Marketing with Alfred Group. Our session today is titled Giving USA 2022, What Lies Ahead for Philanthropy in America. Before we dive in, I want to tell you a little bit about Alfred Group and walk you through some housekeeping items. So I realize that many of you, most of you, are familiar with Alfred Group and who we are. But for anybody who may not be, Alfred Group is a national full-service consultancy serving the nonprofit community. We offer 6 flagship services, which are seen here on the right-hand side of your screen: fundraising, strategic and organizational planning, governance and leadership development, interim staffing, data management, analytics and assessment, and diversity, equity, and inclusion. Our vision is a world where possibilities are endless and reflect the best of who we are as humans. We're proud to be a sponsor and member of AFP, the Association of Fundraising Professionals. We are a proud certified women's business enterprise, and of course, a member of the Giving Institute, which houses the Giving USA Foundation, which writes and creates the Giving USA report that we're going to be discussing today. So of course, for more information, you can jump on our website at alfred.com and learn more about who we are and what we do. A few housekeeping items before we dive in. One, the webinar today is being recorded, and we will send you an email within 24 hours with a link to the recording of the webinar. So you're welcome to watch it later. You're also welcome to share it with others. When we conclude today, you will be immediately prompted to complete a very short survey. It's truly short. It's 4 questions. We really encourage you to take the online survey. It will provide us with really valuable feedback. Everyone today is in listen-only mode for the duration of the webinar. However, we're taking questions throughout the entire 90-minute session. So to ask a question, all you need to do is mouse over at the bottom of your screen. There should be a Q&A icon. And that will open up a window. You can chat your question, and that goes to the panelists. We will answer as many questions as we can at the end of today's session. And then finally, please join us on Twitter. We'll be live tweeting, and we'll be using our handle at the Alfred Group and the hashtag GivingUSA2022. And we invite you to join the conversation there as well. So with that, I'm going to turn things over to Brenda Sari, President and CEO of Alfred Group, to walk us through the agenda and kick us off today.
Thank you so much, Lucinda. And again, thank all of you for making time for this webinar this afternoon. We're really looking forward to our time together. Our individual and collective desire to maximize positive impact means that as the world continues to evolve, so too must the practice of philanthropy. The future of philanthropy, which I believe is already here, is about connecting a greater number of people with the opportunity to be generous to causes that they care about through personal engagement, technology, and the social ecosystem. We are already witnessing how new donor behavior, new ways of giving, the expansion of the definition of who is seen as a philanthropist and what is defined as philanthropy continue to shape how we approach a philanthropic marketplace. While no one can predict the future, we can strive to become better informed about what is ahead and use that information to be better change makers, enablers, and impact drivers. Taking the long view has never been easy. However, as change accelerates in an increasingly connected world, more organizations are looking further ahead to better understand emerging opportunities and threats. Some are incremental and some are radical revolutions. The big challenge is in differentiating these, gaining a clear understanding of which changes are most likely, and most importantly, how will we respond? The intention of our time together this afternoon is to consider perspectives from leaders representing diverse sectors to understand shifts that will further inform, drive, and shape strategy in maximizing fundraising results to deepen impact in communities across the country. Karen Rocker-Wynn, Chief Enterprise Officer with Alfred, will kick us off with an overview of the Giving USA data, followed by Dr. Dan Hungerman, a professor of economics at University Notre Dame, and a researcher focusing on charitable giving and public policy. Dan will then join our esteemed panelists, Marguerite Griffin, a philanthropist and Senior Vice President with Northern Trust. As Director of Philanthropic Advisory Services, Marguerite works with families across the country who seek to give back to make the world a better place. We are honored to have Dan and Marguerite here today to bring insights from their respective fields. We're also pleased to have a practitioner with us who brings over 20 years of nonprofit fundraising experience, Marco Corona, Chief Development Officer for the soon-to-be open International African American Museum in Charleston, South Carolina. I look forward to our time together when we move into the panel segment of the webinar. Karen, take it from here.
Thank you so much, Brenda. It's great to be with you all here again this year, and I'm so pleased to share some key takeaways from the Giving USA 2022 Annual Report on Philanthropy. This report reflects total philanthropic giving in 2021 and provides an overview of the sources of giving and the recipients by sectors. Next slide. Here is an overview of what I will cover in the next 15 minutes. I'll talk a little bit about what is Giving USA, the 2021 contributions by source and recipient, the rates of change for giving for the last 2 years, trends in total giving, the economic trends that impacted giving, trends in giving by source, and trends in giving by recipient type. So first of all, I want to tell you a little bit about Giving USA. Next slide. Giving USA is the oldest and most comprehensive report on charitable giving in the United States, started by the American Association of Fundraising Council in 1956, which is now the Giving Institute. This report is published by the Giving USA Foundation, which is part of the Giving Institute, comprised of national firms such as Alfred Group. Our consultancy has been a member of the Institute and a significant donor to the research that's reflected in this report for over 30 years. The report is researched and written by the Indiana University Lilly Family School of Philanthropy, and it's made possible by contributions from the Giving Institute member firms, foundations, and other donors. It is a big data project, 128 million households, 600,000 nonprofits, 80,000 US foundations and businesses of all stages. So, the headline we've all been waiting for. Total estimated charitable giving in the United States reached $484.85 billion in charitable giving in the United States. This is the highest dollar amount ever, and a 4% increase in current dollars over 2020. We must note, however, that if you adjust for inflation, giving remained relatively flat with a change of -7% adjusted for inflation. Total charitable giving, as I mentioned, reached $485 billion in 2021. Next slide, please. Increasing by $18.6 billion in current dollars from 2020. The average year-to-year change in total giving between 1981 and 2021 was an increase of $10.74 billion, making the current dollar change in total giving between 20 and 21 larger than the 40-year average. That's incredible. It declined by a negative 3.29 between 20 and 21 when you adjust for inflation. So over the last 40 years, total giving in current dollars grew the most in the 10-year period from 92 to 2001 at 108%. The slowest 10-year period was 2002 to 2011. So this slide shows total giving since 1981, and the green bars reflect the years in which the giving declined in inflation-adjusted dollars. Total giving has declined 10 times since 1981. And I like to point out, however, that even though we experienced years of decline due to recessions, giving did not drop to nearly the degree of the declines of the stock market. So what are the factors that influenced giving in 2021? Well, the S&P grew at an astonishing rate of almost 27%. The GDP grew by 10%. Large gifts from some of the wealthiest Americans reached a total of nearly $15 billion in 2021. I'll touch on that in a moment when we talk about mega gifts. Giving remained strong despite the challenges. Donors matched the record set in 2020, which was a record of all time. Americans continued to give more generously than before the pandemic. And then efforts to advance racial justice continued at an unprecedented philanthropic response. Many donors returned to their favorite causes, with many of the sectors that struggled in 2020 making a recovery in 2021. I guess if we were to say there are themes from Giving USA 2022 about 2021, we would say innovation, resilience, and the ability to adapt are the key themes from Giving USA 2021. So this next slide illustrates the point that I made a moment ago, that even during a dramatic change in the stock market, total giving dropped at a more modest degree. 2021 was such a dramatic year. The S&P grew 21.2% in inflation-adjusted dollars between 2020 and 2021. And it's compared with a flat negative 0.7% growth for total giving in inflation-adjusted dollars. So it's the first time we've seen that bar for the S&P go above the total giving in inflation-adjusted dollars. The next slide shows several economic factors relate to how much donors give to a charity each year. The gross domestic product, the GDP, is one of those factors. The GDP is defined as the market value of all goods and services produced within a country's borders within a specific period of time. It's one of the most important factors considered in measuring the status of a nation's economic health. The total giving as a percentage of GDP in 21 was 2.1%. It was below 2% throughout most of the 70s, 80s, and 90s. It rose to 2% and stayed above most of the 2000s, but then dropped again in 09. But it's hovered at around 2% for so long. And every time I look at this, I think one day I hope to see that this will rise above 3%. Just imagine the impact this would have on philanthropy. So the next slide is my favorite slide. It shows you the highlights of the 2021 sources of contributions. When we look at the $326 billion coming from individuals, it was an increase of 4.9% in 2021, and it comprised 67% of all giving. Giving by foundations, which includes grants by independent, community, and operating foundations, grew 3.4% to an estimated almost $91 billion in 21 and amounted to 19% of all gifts made in 2021. That's the highest percentage ever from foundations. And it's important to note that approximately half of that amount from foundations comes from individuals and families, okay? Then, of course, giving by bequests totaled an estimated $46 billion last year, declining by 7.3% over the previous year. And giving by corporations is estimated to have increased by almost 24% in 2021, totaling $21 billion, and it represents 4% of all giving. It's important to understand that corporate giving includes cash and in-kind contributions made through corporate giving programs as well as grants and gifts made by corporate foundations. And I'll say the reason I love this slide is that if you factor in outright individual gifts, bequests, and 1/2 of the foundation support that comes from individuals and families, individual giving comprises 89% of all charitable giving. So when someone on the board, the volunteers, or the staff says, I think we should focus all of our efforts on corporate, I'm not saying you shouldn't get your piece of the pie in corporate. In fact, there are a lot of opportunities, but this is why we focus so much of our energy in our practice and with our clients on individual giving and helping organizations increase the impact that is made by individuals. So the next slide are just some key takeaways to show you a snapshot of the ups and downs from 2021 over the previous year. Some key takeaways, as I mentioned, foundations set a new record of almost 20% of total giving. That's a high of all time. Many foundations moved to more unrestricted models of giving after the pandemic in response to everything that was happening in 2020, and they continued that in 2021. And they continued multi-year partnerships and grants. They increased their overall payout rates in response to the challenges of the 2020 era, our new term, the 2020 era. Corporations have increasingly expanded the ways they partner with nonprofits through cause marketing, sponsorships, and impact investing. And it grew by an astonishing 23% in 2021. The next slide shows you giving by individuals over the past 40 years. The black line represents actual current dollars, and the green bar shows a more accurate picture of apples to apples adjusted for inflation. So what was $45 billion in 1981 in actual dollars would be 137 billion in today's dollars. It's incredible growth in individual giving in 2021. And remember, this includes gifts of cash, securities, and property. The very large mega gifts or gifts by individuals that require an adjustment to the econometric estimate totaled $14.9 billion in 2021. In fact, this next slide shows you a list of some of those mega gifts. And of course, bolstered by the strong market conditions, very large gifts by some of the wealthiest Americans reached the total of nearly 15 billion. These type of mega gifts that are defined in Giving USA 22 are gifts of 450 million or more, and they represent about 5% of all individual giving in 2021 and played an important role in lifting individual giving. Here's a list of the mega gifts for you to look at, and it's an incredible list with some extraordinary giving, and you can see where these dollars were designated. The next slide is giving by foundations over the last 40 years. And again, it's grant making by independent, community, and operating foundations, and it increased 3.4% over 2020 to almost $91 billion in 2021 in current dollars. If you adjust it for inflation, there's a slight dip of a negative 1.2% in 2021. The next slide, giving by bequest. Of course, there are volatile swings that are affected by decedents of large estates in any given year. Charitable giving by bequest declined by a negative 7.3% in current dollars over the previous year. However, it reached $46 billion in giving. And it includes an estimated amount for charitable bequests from estates with assets of 10 million and above, estates with assets between 1 and 10, and estates with assets below 1 million. So I love to share this data because you'll understand in a moment. So the estimated bequest giving from estates 10 million and above that filed estates amounted to $23 billion. Bequests from estates between 1 and 10 million amounted to $9 billion, But here's the point that I really want to make. Estimated bequest giving from estates with assets below $1 million amounted to $13.7 billion. So if you don't have a planned giving program, you need to start one. It's often presumed that all of these estate gifts are coming from large estates, but almost 14 billion of that came from estates with assets below $1 million. That's a lot of donors leaving charitable organizations in their estate planning, in their bequests. Next slide, corporations, a huge increase in 2021. It increased by almost 24%, totaling 21 billion and represents 4% of all giving. It includes cash, in-kind, made through corporate giving programs, as well as grants and gifts by corporate foundations. It grew by 18% in 2021. And it's important to note that the GDP, as I mentioned, it grew 10% over 2020, and corporate pre-tax profits increased by an astonishing 37.4% in current dollars. Both of these economic indicators are closely linked to corporate giving. So now, where did these dollars go? How were they distributed? So religious organizations continue to receive the largest share of charitable dollars and received nearly 136 billion, or 27%. This sector, however, has been declining as a share of total giving, a share of the pie, which when I started looking at this information 20 years ago, and I've been tracking it, it was more like half of the pie. The dollars haven't decreased, but the percentage of the pie has decreased because of the growth of the other sectors. So the next largest subsector comprised 71 billion, and that was education, or 14% of total gifts. Human services ranked third with 65 billion. Gifts to grant-making foundations, which include independent, community, and operating foundations, comprise the fourth largest share, amounting to 13% of all giving. And the fifth largest portion of charitable dollars, public society benefit organizations received 11% of total giving. This is growth in this area. And just as a reminder, the public society benefit subsector includes a wide range of organizations, including national donor advised funds, such as Fidelity Charitable, pass-through organizations, such as the United Way, Jewish federations, and many civil rights organizations, which have seen large gifts in response to racial and social justice efforts in the last 2 years. The health subsector ranked sixth, received 8%, international affairs received 5%, and to note that it wasn't even tracked as a subsector until 1987. Arts, culture, and humanities were eighth, largest at 5%. Environment and animals received 3% of total gifts. Finally, gifts made to individuals amounted to 2% and nearly $12 billion. So this next slide here will give you a nice picture of the changes in giving to recipient organizations over a 2-year period. And in looking at the giving, the changes in the giving by type of recipient over 2 years in current dollars, here are some of the key takeaways to really look at here. First of all, giving to health and the arts rebounded after a difficult 2020. Arts and culture were able to resume a lot of face-to-face events, but they are also supported by the very strong economy. High net worth individuals tend to support the arts. Religious congregations saw some monetary growth in 2021, and those who made investments in technology and online engagement were the ones that benefited the most. The environment, public society benefit, and foundations have grown for 2 consecutive years. And we also saw a big swing with a slight decline in giving to education in 2021 compared to the incredible growth in 2020. And just as a reminder, last year we looked at education, which received a significant support in 2020 for all of the education-related needs that were due to the pandemic. So it's interesting when we look at these sectors and how they reflect. our economic times, and certainly the impact due to the pandemic. And finally, it's important to see giving to foundations is strongly linked to the financial markets, which were strong. So looking forward, what to think about looking forward. Nonprofits need flexibility and innovation to navigate new and ongoing challenges. Technology plays such a key role. Hybrid events are here to stay. Online giving now accounts for 12% of total fundraising, which is a growing share of giving. And how we build trust through engagement and relationships can be challenging online and virtually. However, understanding how to sustain and engage your donors will lead to better sustainability. Organizations that have made investments in technology and online engagement have benefited the most. Build those capacities if you haven't done this already. And if you don't have a planned giving program, it's time to start one. If you do have a planned giving program, it's time to invest more effort into the program. Remember, the bequest giving from estates with assets below $1 million amounted to $13.71 billion. And finally, a bright spot of 2021, corporate giving grew. It's a great time to build relationships. Corporations have become more strategic in their approach. And finally, stay focused on the power of individuals in philanthropy. Stay close to your donors, communicate, communicate, communicate. We hope that you can use this Giving USA data to benchmark against your own organization, and that you'll be able to take what you've learned from this to help strengthen your reach into broadening your community of supporters. So to obtain the full report, you can go to this website, and you will have this information following the information today. So finally, we want to take a quick poll before we move on. And Lucinda is going to put this poll up on your screen. And we are going to ask you, how has fundraising for your organization been going so far in 2022 compared to last year? Would you say you're raising more money, you're raising less money, or it's about the same? We're at the end of June. We're about halfway through 2022. Let's give this poll just another couple of seconds to please respond, to let us know where this is going. And I'm liking what I'm seeing, in that I'm liking so far that we're seeing 48%. Okay, there might be a few more. So Lucinda, this is great. We're seeing 48% raising more money, 20% raising less money, and 32% at about the same. Very interesting. And thank you to the almost 150 of you that responded. All right, well, next, I'm really excited to introduce our next guest here, Dr. Daniel Hungerman, who is going to share with you some of his insight, a tale of two sectors. So Daniel, over to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Karen. Wow, that was a really interesting presentation to hear. I'm glad to follow up and talk a little bit about research on charitable giving. When I teach classes on charitable giving here at Notre Dame, the very first day, every semester, one of the things I tell the students is that the federal government collects lots of great information on all sorts of economic activities, but not really very much when it comes to charitable giving and the nonprofit sector. And on that very first day of class, every semester, what we talk about that first day of class is Giving USA and the uniqueness and the value of this data. And so when I was asked to be a part of this, I was really glad to say yes. I actually took part in a event a little bit like this for Giving USA. It was like 6 years ago, actually. And boy, things have really changed in some ways since then. We've had a lot of really big shocks that have kind of come from all over the place in recent years. Of course, we've had a pandemic, we've had economic shocks, big social events, and some big policy changes too. And these just seem to keep coming. And so it might be natural to ask, what have these meant for the nonprofit sector, and what do they mean going forward? So when I spoke 6 years ago at a Giving USA event, one of the things I talked about then was how I kind of viewed this as a sector that had different facets, different aspects, with different donors and charities that were faring differently. And I broke that down using my favorite television show, The Simpsons. And I used two different characters in The Simpsons. One of those characters is a really wealthy individual, Mr. Burns. Yep, there he is. And so Mr. Burns is that fellow in the suit. He owns the power plant in the TV show The Simpsons. He's a wealthy individual. And then right next to him in that green sweater, that's Ned Flanders. He's the religiously devout, middle class, next door neighbor to the Simpsons family on the show The Simpsons. 6 years ago, I talked about how Mr. Burns, I thought, was gaining an ever increasingly important role in fundraising, although they're both very important parts of the nonprofit sector, both the wealthy and the middle class. And so today here in 2022, I wanted to first revisit the question of, is Mr. Burns still really important and more important than ever before? And if so, does that suggest kind of different implications for different donors and for different charities here in light of all the stuff that's been going on in the nonprofit sector? So on this next slide, you'll see a little bit of evidence about the role of Mr. Burns. Here, I'm going to revisit a classic rule, the 80-20 rule, that says that you get about 80% of your revenue from about 20% of the donors. I put that to the test in a national survey, the Panel Study of Income Dynamics, that asks people over time about their charitable activity. Here, the vertical axis shows the fraction of donations in that data set that come from the most generous 20% of donors. And I just plot that fraction out over time. And if you look at the first decade of the 2000s, well, by golly, it actually does look like something pretty close to the 80-20 rule. The most generous 20% of donors are giving something pretty close to 80%. This data set also doesn't really include those mega donations that we were just hearing about a little bit ago. So if you put those in here, you'd be almost exactly at 80%. It's really remarkable. But then if we look at the most recent decade, you can see that we're kind of drifting away from the 80-20 rule. Now, the most generous donors are responsible for more than 85% of giving. We're getting close to 90%. And while this picture stops just before 2020, kind of as the presentation Karen gave suggested, I see no reason to expect that this line is turned out. So I think that your large donors, the Mr. Burns of the world, have remained super important, and in fact, their importance in the charitable giving sector overall appears to have grown. With that in mind, we might ask the question, what do we take as particular implications of this, given all the recent shocks and all the recent events in the nonprofit sector? So on this next slide, I outline a few of those things. So as these donors have grown in influence, there are going to be some particular issues that might matter, particularly for these sorts of donors. One would be the rise of donor advised funds over the past decade. I think also this growth reflects an unusual recession in 2020. So this was a recession that had pretty different impacts on the most well-off and fortunate relative to the most vulnerable economically, even more so than in some other recessions, such as the Great Recession back in, say, 2009. I think it also may reflect patterns of economic inequality that have been developing over decades in this country. That's something that economists have spoken a lot about. I think there's some research that suggests that the rising influence of Mr. Burns actually may be even more dramatic than the general increase in economic inequality that we see in the United States. But it may be part of a bigger pattern. And I think another really important implication of the rising influence of donors like Mr. Burns is the fact, as Karen mentioned earlier, that often mega donors are focused on particular sorts of charities. And with that in mind, it raises the issue that some charities might face stiffer headwinds moving forward than others. That then brings up the question of kind of what's going on outside of Mr. Burns's world. And so on this next slide, we turn then to the Ned Flanders, the traditional sort of giver, and the sort of charities that are often the focus of those donors. For those sorts of charities, they might face stiffer headwinds. So in particular, I think religious congregations may face different and in some cases more difficult challenges moving forward than others, and religiously affiliated charities, which of course traditionally have been such an important, such a critical part of the nonprofit sector, and they remain so today. I have less hard data on this, but my impression, and if people in the audience disagree, I'd be glad to hear it. But my impression is that like small local charities have also really kind of taken it on the chin in the last couple of years with the pandemic and the recession, and that the challenges they have faced have been pretty different from those of other charities. Thinking about recent events and how they might matter for these sorts of what I would call, traditional donors, I think there are kind of special opportunities here and special events or shocks that have mattered more for Ned Flanders than for the Mr. Burnses of the world. We've seen an increased interest, for example, in days devoted to Giving Tuesday, those sorts of things. And sometimes those have been focused not just on giving, but giving locally. We've seen, I think, some increased interest in, somewhat new sources of fundraising, things like crowdsourcing, Donors Choose, opportunities like that. I think that there's some growing interest in trying to improve the level of donor information and awareness of charity, quote unquote, quality, although I don't know if that's a finished product at the moment. That might be something that will continue to develop in the next few years. And then there are some policy considerations that might matter, particularly for the Ned Flanderses of the world. Maybe the most notable one there would be the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, or TCJA, which was a law passed in 2017 that took effect in 2018. As many people here may know, that law changed the standard deduction that taxpayers could take, so that about 1 out of 5 taxpayers stopped itemizing their taxes and instead took the standard deduction. In other words, about 1 out of 5 taxpayers lost any federal tax-based incentive to give to charity. And so there's an important question there of, without that incentive, did charitable giving from that group decline? And so the last thing I want to do today is show you just a brief bit of preliminary evidence that's related to this. And I want to emphasize this is hot off the press stuff. This is work that will hopefully be in a completed paper form in a month or so. But I and my colleagues are kind of putting it together right now. So I'm showing you the top secret stuff here. Here's what it looks like, and let me explain this picture. There's kind of 3 pairs of bars here. Each pair of bars shows average giving for a certain group of taxpayers right before the tax reform and then right after the tax reform law. This first pair of bars, which is labeled always, focuses on taxpayers who had like really high itemizable expenses, who are almost certainly going to itemize all the time. And so for these taxpayers, there's really no effect of the law. The law doesn't really change what they're doing. And in fact, when we look at their average giving before the law and after, adjusted for inflation, it's pretty close to flat. Similarly, the middle group of bars labeled never, these are people who have really low itemizable expenses, and in fact, they don't itemize their taxes, and we don't foresee circumstances where they would want to. So similarly, for this middle group, the never itemizers, this tax law didn't really change what was going on either. The final group, where you see the largest decline, is for what we call the switchers. These are people for whom this law did change their incentive to itemize and thus their tax-based incentive to give. For this group, we see a decline in charitable giving. It's of several $100s. And when you remember that 1 out of 5 taxpayers falls into this group, it's a lot of taxpayers. And if you add it up, you'll get a notable decline in total charitable giving. So the takeaway from this picture, which again remains a little bit top secret, it's going to hopefully be ready for the whole world in a few weeks, is that tax incentives matter, and that there is some evidence that this tax reform lowered giving for that kind of middle class group, the Ned Flanders of the world, who were potentially affected by a change in their incentive to itemize. Stepping back though, and getting back to all these recent, really momentous events that have occurred for the nonprofit sector in recent years, I think the key takeaway I want to share today is that, what all of this means for different donors and for different charities probably depends on what sort of donors you look at and what sort of charities you're talking to. Overall, you could describe it as a tale of two sectors. So thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, Dan. Before we turn to the panel, I'd like to ask just a couple of questions. Along with tax incentives for donors, charities themselves can offer incentives, for instance, through matches. What do we know about how these incentives work?
Yeah, matches are an important financial incentive that charities can use to try to get donors to give. There is evidence that matches work. So there's good evidence. So it's pretty clear that donors respond to matches and give more. In recent years, I'd say research has kind of begun to find consensus on two extra facts that I'll quickly mention there. The first is that you might wonder whether when you offer a match, if you get more donations, you're like cannibalizing donations later. You know, you're getting people to give more now, but maybe they'll give less later as a result. The news there is pretty encouraging. Some recent research I've seen suggests that that's not really the case. You'll get more giving now from the match, but it's not at the cost of future giving. So that's good news. And then one last thing to mention about matches is that research has also found that while donors are pretty responsive, for instance, to a one-to-one match, if you offer them that opportunity, if you increase the match rate, you go from a one-to-one match to like a 2-to-1 match or a 3-to-1 match, that usually doesn't actually elicit even further response from donors. Why that's the case, people are still trying to figure out.
Great. So we're happy to hear that matches still work. My other follow-up question, I know we have a number of clients who weigh very heavily on the importance of Charity Navigator. They believe that donors are actually going to Charity Navigator and other sources like that to evaluate where to place their dollars. Do we know much about how donors value these rankings on websites like Charity Navigator and others?
Yeah, there is some evidence that donors value donor rankings and the rankings on Charity Navigator in particular. So there's some work by an economist. Her name's Jennifer Mayo, M-A-Y-O, who's going to join the faculty at the University of Missouri this summer. And she actually looked at Charity Navigator. In 2016, Charity Navigator kind of rejiggered their ranking formula a little bit. And so some charities gained a star and some charities lost a star as a result. She kind of exploited that and found as a result that charities which gained a star saw about a 6% increase in donations as a result. And that result was strongest for like smaller or medium-sized charities. There's some evidence for big charities, but it wasn't as robust. So yeah, I think that matters. My sense also, looking at like the next 10 years, if I can try to make a bold prediction here or something, is that you know, efforts to increase donor information about charities or the sophistication, not just of like really wealthy donors, but just, you know, everyday donors, I think it's gonna, you know, I don't know if we're quite at a revolution yet, but I wonder 10 years from now if donors are gonna be even more sophisticated than they are today.
Wow, thank you so much, Dan.
Yeah.
I'd like to now invite Marguerite and Marco to now join us. As we now take a look, I'd like to get both of your perspectives. You've heard the data from the Giving USA report out, as well as the recent research conducted by Dr. Hungerman. So would love to know, you know, as you reflect on the data that we've heard this afternoon, were there any surprises for you? Marguerite, you know, we would love to hear you share a bit about your work with families and your observations about how they're approaching philanthropy in 2021 versus 2020.
Sure, thank you, and very happy to be here. Our team of advisors at Northern Trust, we work with high net worth clients to help them align their philanthropic interests and their ambitions with their wealth transfer planning goals. And this may involve helping them create impactful mission statements, implement programs for grant making, or prepare family members to take leadership roles within their family's philanthropic activities. In 2020, there was definitely a feeling that despite their best efforts to create positive change, their charitable giving hadn't been successful in making fundamental changes to our underlying community support systems. In 2021, our clients were looking at ways to dig in, to do more, and to commit even more resources to the causes that were important to them. I believe we are all becoming acutely aware of our interconnectedness. And this has been a theme over the past 2 years that has guided much of the intentions and the expectations around charitable giving. And it was interesting, Dan spoke about smaller organizations, smaller charitable organizations. I believe that there is generally an interest in supporting organizations that were close to home, that were doing things in the community where our clients live. But there was also the concern that because of their size, that they didn't have the capacity to actually get the funds out to the people who needed it most as quickly as possible. In many cases, that wasn't the case. In fact, that these organizations were quite capable of that. But that was one of the issues that we had to work through for many donors who wanted to focus on place-based giving during this time. In general, I found that clients are becoming more willing to confront matters of race, oppression, and privilege, and how that informs their charitable contributions, how they give, what restrictions they put on their gifts, and why they feel like they need to put restrictions on their gifts. They're also curious about trust-based philanthropy. They may not see the pathways right now, but they're willing to move away from philanthropy as usual. And then they're becoming more familiar with the concept of intersectionality, that you can't focus, for example, on reproductive health without considering the racial and economic disparities in Black and Brown communities. You can't just focus on gender equality without considering racial inequalities. So those are some of the things that we're finding among our clients and the donors that I work with.
Wow, that's exciting to know and to hear that these donors and these philanthropists are continuing to lean in.
Yeah.
To really be very strategic around their giving. I love your phrase, move away from philanthropy as usual, because it certainly isn't as usual, like any business, right? Marco, it's wonderful to see a rebound in the arts and culture sector after the challenges of 2020, because we certainly know typically when there's a dip in giving, one of the sectors that is heavily impacted are arts and culture organizations. So as a practitioner, how close do these findings align with your experience and interaction with donors?
Yeah. So, well, first of all, I mean, snaps to Marguerite, and I think, we are.
Send you some of those donors, right?
I know, right? Oh my gosh, let's have a conversation after this. But I think, I'm actually echoing, I think, a lot of what Marguerite said, and just what I'm finding when I, kind of in working with donors, and just sort of like what I'm discovering. It is wonderful that we've seen a rebound, and our museum is still still, kind of in the process of opening, or will be opening next year. So we haven't experienced some of those same dips that other arts and cultures institutions have experienced. But I know in working from them, I know that there was this hard pivot, with a lot of organizations to really, have virtual programs, or to figure out how to bring the museum or bring culture and arts to people, as opposed to having them come to the institution. And so I think I'll talk a little bit about that in a second, but I just sort of, while it's been wonderful to see the rebound, I think, at the same time, what the study revealed is that there's growing competition for donors. And I think that's what we're experiencing on the ground, is that, kind of to get a donation, you're having to compete with not just other nonprofits, but the world. Donors make donations, and that's a choice. And what affects their choice, or what goes into their decision making, is really everything that's happening around them. So, pandemic, racial reckoning, inflation, all of those things are going into their decision making and their calculus around philanthropy. So as fundraisers, I think we have to be ready to meet the donors where they are, understand what's going on with their lives, kind of get a better sense, be empathetic. I understand that we have our needs, but it's also thinking about, okay, where are the donors coming from? So I think one successful pivot that we had, and we were forced to make, since we're not open yet, is around that access piece, right? We're not open, but we want to start telling these stories and meeting our mission now. We don't want to wait until our doors are open. We want to we want to tell people about the untold stories of the African-American journey, that stemmed from Gadsden's Wharf, one of the most prolific slave trading ports in the history of the United States, here in Charleston, South Carolina. So that's been kind of largely our messaging. We understand that our donors want to make an impact in the racial justice arena. It's not just about arts and culture. So again, Marguerite, I'm just going to echo what you were saying. I'm just going to steal it, but it really is the case that I think, when we look at our donors, it's less about arts and culture and more about what they represent and the impact they can make in our society. So we tailor our messaging not just around what the museum will give visitors and give the donor, but it's about what they will get, what the world will get from the museum if they support us, kind of with their support. Look what the museum can do to make an impact, to get the word out, to tell these stories, to be part of the conversation that we're having around racial reckoning and racial justice. So, when I talk to donors, I really get the sense that more and more of them give with the purpose of making the most impact with their dollars. And I think that's where, kind of us as practitioners, fundraisers as practitioners, we have to get better at that. Just meet them where they are, and approach them with the sense of, I know you want to make an impact. Let's have that conversation.
It was interesting, Marco, to listen to Dan's research on the tale of two sectors. And then Karen talking about, 15% of the $485 billion coming from mega donors. Would love to hear you share your perspective on, strategies that you're using to either engage more of your existing donors and then opportunities to broaden your base of support, because certainly it wasn't lost on us when we saw from the poll. We did have a pretty strong percentage who felt that they were raising less money. And again, where is that coming from? Are we seeing maybe donors that we acquired in 2020? Did we lose them, due to attrition? We weren't able to retain them. So what strategies are you putting in place as you look at your existing and then balancing that with engaging and broadening your support base?
Yeah, so we so one thing that we're doing, and I think kind of works to really tell the tale to both of those sectors.
Yes.
Because ultimately that's really kind of where we want to. That's our operating assumption, is that we're not just about gaining support from one type of donor. We want to diversify, right? We don't want to put all our eggs in one basket, particularly if you just get high net worth individuals. If one of them goes away, that's a whole lot of money to try to make up in 1 year. So your budgets are dependent on you being able to diversify your donor base. But one thing that that we're looking at is this idea of ABC programming at the museum. So, kind of level A programming. This is the stuff, these are the large exhibitions. These are the things that will take 1 year to 2 years to plan and execute. Your B-level programming is your, kind of annual programs. These are your feature programs. These are the things, your bread and butter. And the C-level programming is really the stuff that just sort of, you have to be ready at a moment's notice to put something on, to meet the moment, to react to a situation. And so I think, when we look at that and we structure when we structure our programming that way, I think that allows us to really match our donors to those needs.
Wow.
And say, kind of, hey, when we run a campaign, when we talk to our high net worth individuals, our high net worth donors, we can say, here are our level A programs that we're looking out 2 years down the line. Would you help us, kind of bring those to life? They could also be very, for those mid-level donors, we could also look at them at that B level, right? Kind of to make sure that they're supporting these annual programs, these feature programming, and then kind of with our small donations, that's where I think the immediate need, the sense of urgency, that's where someone, I saw Dan's either presentation or I think in our previous conversations just about like, crowdsourcing. That's where you want to inject them, right? Is around this kind of like, hey, we got an immediate need in 4 weeks, we're going to do this, and we really need your help. People will respond to that and react to that, particularly if we have a match around it too. So,
Yes.
so I think, what that ultimately reflects to me is that donors want to be able to see their fingerprints. They want to be able to know that when I make this donation, and this goes back to what Marguerite and I said, but when I make this donation, I want to feel like it actually is doing something. So, for example, with the Ned Flanders of the world,
Yeah.
when they make when they make $100 donation, are they going to feel like that $100 has a bigger impact when you ask them to contribute to a campaign that is trying to raise $10,000 in 4 weeks, or $5 million in 1 year? Where are they going to feel that $100 is gonna make the bigger difference? And so I think that's where, kind of when we're strategizing for the year and we're looking at where we can, who we can ask for what donations and who, where we're going to have the greatest success. I think kind of breaking it down by that ABC programming structure, as well as understanding that small donations are going to be more successful in a when the campaign is smaller and they feel like they're a bigger portion of that.
That's a really solid strategy. Marguerite, at the same time, there's been a lot of conversation over the past, I would say probably over the past 15 years, when we talk about the next generation. And I think, okay, that was 15 years ago, and they're not the next generation anymore. They now the now generation. So to put this into context, we all have been reading about this great transfer of wealth, from the millennial generation and the next generation, somewhere between 30 to 68 trillion dollars expected to be a part of this grand transfer. Would love to get your perspective on what are the shifts that we now need to be putting in place as we think about the next generation, which may be the now generation, and how are they approaching philanthropy that may be different from their parents, and also share, any additional thoughts that development professionals should keep top of mind as they navigate their engagement with these donors.
Yes, I really like that, the now generation. We really do need to rethink or redefine what we mean by the next generation.
Yes.
Millennials are now between the ages of 25 and 40. They have families, they have careers, they're already making plans about, plans for sending their kids to college. They're busy trying to build their own wealth, in addition to negotiating how they're going to manage inherited wealth. In addition to inheriting wealth, they're also inheriting expectations for how that wealth will be used. And here's where we see the differences. The millennial generation has a different relationship with money and its uses. I find that their money mindset is much more fluid. As compared to their parents and grandparents, they're less likely to define themselves by their wealth. Their wealth in and of itself doesn't define them, but how they use their wealth is what defines them. Millennial donors are also fueled by their belief in their own ability to be forces for good and forces for change. They want to make social change core to how they live their lives. And what that means, or what it means to be a philanthropist, is less about having buildings with your name on it, and more about how they're helping communities today. They're very cognizant of how fast the world is moving, and they want to be nimble. They're also less likely to make long-term commitments to a single organization. They're more likely to hedge their bets by building a portfolio of charitable organizations that are approaching issues from different vantage points. And they're also influenced by some of the critics and supporters of philanthropy today. They're influenced by Anand Giridharadas, the author of Winners Take All, who says that while elites have done so much to help, they've also continued to hoard the overwhelming share of progress. They're influenced by Adrienne Marie Brown, the author of Emergent Strategy, who says that if we want to be social change actors, we have to be intentional, adaptive, and we have to recognize our interdependence. We can't be afraid to abandon processes and practices that are producing outcomes that are not equitable or otherwise settle for doing things a certain way when you know it's not working. They're also influenced by authors and speakers like Edgar Villanueva, author of Decolonizing Wealth. And he shares that money can be used not to divide and exploit, but to heal communities. These are just a few of the writers and authors who are focused on philanthropy, but I believe that if you want to know how this next generation of wealth holders are thinking about philanthropy and its role in society, it's important to be familiar with what they're reading, what they're listening to, and what they're watching. And while many next gen, they want to support their family's charitable legacy by supporting organizations that their families supported over the years, they're much more likely to carve out a portion of their charitable dollars for these legacy gifts. And then the majority of their giving is going to be focused on causes that are important to them and issues that will affect their children's lives. And I can't say enough about the emphasis on creating equitable solutions. If a nonprofit organization is not including in their donor communications how their programs and services are helpful to the planet and are creating equitable access to resources, among other impact measures, they're going to miss an opportunity to engage with this segment of the population.
Wow, thank you so much, Marguerite. That's really great information about how we should be approaching that generation. I'd love for you to frame it as the next generation of wealth holders, because that's really how we should be talking about this group of philanthropists. And even though I know that, typically there is right now a definition for the now generation, my intent was just saying that we can't think that they're in the future. They're in front of us right now making these really critical decisions.
Yes.
Yeah. Certainly, as we talk about building on your comment about one of the factors that millennials are looking at in this next generation of wealth holders is looking at organizations that are helpful to the planet and are bringing forward equitable access. Dr. Hungerman, I would love to get your perspective on, social change was a key driver in your research. What insights can you share relative to how philanthropy is being redefined and who is being seen as a philanthropist? What are the shifts in that area that you can bring forward?
Yeah, I'd be happy to take a crack at answering that question. Although at this point, I would have to say, I think my fellow panelists would be at least as good at answering that question. It sounds like they have a lot of great wisdom and insight that they could share there too. One thing I could say there is when we look at the momentous social movements that we see in our society and in our communities in the last few years. An important message that I've taken away from that is that it's an opportunity for everyone to be empowered and to make a difference. And so, as an example of that, there's some work looking at like large social movements by myself and some others that takes inspiration from the original Earth Day. You were mentioning kind of environmental work a minute ago. So the original Earth Day was April 22nd, 1970. And that work shows that if you look at places that had unusually great weather that exact day, and then had, larger participation in Earth Day that day, and compared to places that had unusually bad weather, they were unlucky and had bad weather that day and pretty low, interest in Earth Day as a result. Those communities look different from each other even 20 years later. So places that had good weather and big Earth Day participation had cleaner air, healthier kids, and larger support for the environment, even 20 years later compared to other places. And so, if we take that sort of work and then move it to today and look at these social movements today, I would hope that a takeaway from that would be everyone should feel empowered that the work they can do can make a difference. It can make a difference in their community. It can make a difference for the duration, for coming years. And, when we talk about making a difference for tomorrow, we're not necessarily talking about next Thursday, but many Thursdays from now.
Yeah.
And that everyone should feel empowered to try to make a difference like that.
Yeah. So Dan, what I hear you saying is a new definition of philanthropy really is one that includes any act of social good, which is much more expansive than the traditional construct of what philanthropy means. Marco, where do you see opportunities to be more expansive in your work to engage more diverse donors and leaders? And where have you found success? Where have you encountered challenges?
Yeah, so we're in a unique position. I mean, the very nature of our museum kind of builds already sets us up for success in terms of diversifying our donor pool. I will say that just in general, and our mutual friend and colleague Corinne Grant, she just was on the recent panel at AFP Icon, and I found her case study so fascinating in that she works for a university and she is in the advancement department, and she took it as a personal charge to get more African-American donors, alumni donors to the university. And one of the first challenges that she had to overcome was the relationship that those alumni had to the university, because it was not their favorite experience. Being Black, being Black students at a time when racial tensions in the South were even more heightened than they are now. And so she took it upon herself to build that trust. And I think it came from conversations, and it was a long, drawn out process. But she was also the ideal messenger. She was also a Black alumni of that same university, and could speak to the change, could speak to the change that the university had made. And so I think she was a trusted advocate, or a trusted person. And so I think, that's one of the things that I think we need to, really consider in philanthropy, is that, just like, I mean, this is a unattributed quote, it's everywhere. I forget who said it first, but, you can't be what you can't see. And so I think similarly, I'm not gonna, I don't have the turn of phrase, it's just coming out of my head, so I'm not gonna try to be wordsmith here, but it's, you tend to not give if you don't, if a person that's asking you, or the institution that's asking you, you can't see yourself in it. It's not reflective of your community, right? And so I think, the museum, we're in a very privileged position in that, because of our mission, we're able to recruit some incredible staff, African-American staff. We're able to, kind of get the attention of the African-American community, both locally and nationally. When we put out press releases, we also look at, kind of making sure that we are, that we're communicating or sending those out to outlets where, that predominantly have Black viewership or readers. And so that gives us the attention, but then we have to leverage that attention. We have to leverage that into, how do we gain support? How do we get their support? And I think that's where some cultural competency that we have really comes into play. I will tell you personally, when I take donor prospects through the museum or talk to them about the museum, I was surprised that I got this question so often, but a question that kept on coming up was, is this going to be a museum about slavery? And it was asked as, kind of as a way to say, hey, is this going to be the same old, like, tired narrative that, that's really where I'm going to feel sad, but I'm also going to feel like a victim, when you tell my story. And our response was that we will not shy away from accurately retelling the inhumanity of the institution of slavery, but we will do so by highlighting the humanity, genius, and complexity of the individuals who endured it. And so we would tell the trauma and the joy, the struggle and the resilience. And so ultimately our donors didn't want, they didn't want to be told they were a victim again. They didn't want to have this museum that, they were going to go to and felt like, and just see the bad parts reflected in it. So we needed to center our appeals around what is attractive to those donors. And so that's where we really wanted to say, we're going to tell this story. We're going to retell your story and your ancestor's story, but really highlight their survival, their strength, their resilience, and educate people that how hard things were and where and what they had to endure and that you're here. So I think those are some of the things that I think we had to, as we were evolving our fundraising and as we're looking to engage more donors. Those are some of the things that I think people need to consider, or that we considered.
Yeah, it's interesting when you touch on cultural competency. I really align it with what Marguerite was lifting up relative to reading what the millennials are reading, who are the thought leaders, who are the influentials that they're listening to. And I would say the same as we think about engaging diverse donors, BIPOC leaders, you got to go to where the action is, yes. Right? You can read the books, but you also have to engage. Marguerite, I noticed you came off of, what would you add to this conversation?
Oh no, I am agreeing with Marco. I really like that he's spoken about just being sensitive and being open to co-creating solutions with donors, as opposed to just plugging them into a certain category.
Yeah. Well, you're a philanthropist. I mean, and I know you get approached a lot, and you've been very helpful to Alfred Group, participating in interviews for our clients who are looking at more effective ways to engage with donors of color. So as a donor of color, as a Black woman, what's been your experience in terms of your approach, and what advice would you have for our practitioners who are in the room?
Yeah, so thinking of advice, I would hope that the days of creating one case for support, spending hours wordsmithing to find that perfect statement that's going to appeal to a broad swath of donors, I hope those days are over. I think one case for support is not enough. You have to tailor your message to 3, 4, even more different aspects of your audiences, of the potential donors, and approach each potential donor from a place of curiosity. I'm sure, before you go in to meet with a donor, you've looked at their profiles, you have an idea of what their contributions have been in the past, and just keep that information in your back pocket. Don't let it lead the discussions. Personally, I can say that the conversations that I have with charitable organizations are probably quite different than other potential donors, because they know what I do for a living. They know that I advise individuals and families and charitable organizations. And I think in general, when I'm approached, the charities that are asking are less prescriptive. We actually are able to collaborate and co-create and find opportunities together. That is definitely a different experience that many of my clients experience. Their path for contribution is sometimes clearly planned out. They can come to the table and share with me, this is what they've asked. And I don't really get a sense that there was any give and take in that discussion even. So I think charities, before they, maybe they feel that they have to have a specific menu in place in order to close the deal. But I would suggest that they maybe adopt what I would consider a prefix menu, right? So leave a little room for grazing, leave space for the donor to articulate how they want to support the organization. And it's from this place of curiosity and creativity that I believe that you'll land the bigger gifts. And you should always ask donors why they're giving. Ask them to imagine the world that would come into being as a result of their charitable contributions. If you aren't asking questions relating to motivations of donors and only appeal to what you know of their outward affinities or their proclivities, I think you're missing an opportunity to discover how your organization's mission aligns with their values, or to uncover opportunities for them to make meaningful and sustainable gifts.
Wow, that's powerful. Thank you so much, Marguerite. I'm going to just ask one more wrap up, and you've started us off, Marguerite, in terms of takeaways, because we want to make sure that we do have some time for questions and answers as we're quickly approaching the 2 o'clock hour here in Central Time. So, Marguerite, any other thoughts in terms of, as we look to the future, any other takeaways you want to leave with our audience today?
Yes, I believe that, I mean, just as COVID was and still is the primary driver for charitable gifts in our recent times, I believe so too, and this is pretty obvious, will be reproductive justice, gun control, access to food and clean air and water, climate and energy resiliency. These are going to be the drivers of philanthropy and political engagement for many years to come. I also think that the lines between the for-profit sector and the nonprofit sector will continue to blur. We'll see even more giving circles, we'll see multi-sector collaborations, and we'll see funders coming together to address some seemingly intractable problems.
Thank you so much. Marco, your thoughts on takeaways?
Yeah, takeaways. Meet donors where they are. This includes, and gosh, yeah, I love that I have younger staff that can actually navigate this, but even cryptocurrency, right? Like, figuring out how donors are giving. The way that people are managing money is changing. So we need to meet them where they are. Demographics in the US are changing. So as we're talking about Giving USA and we want to engage more households in philanthropy, then, like I said, they need to see themselves represented in philanthropy. So it's paramount that we diversify our fundraising field, our fundraising profession. And then don't forget the basics, ask, thank again, report, and then ask again. Yeah. So donors are giving because they want to make a difference. So tell them how they are.
Terrific. Karen?
Thanks. This is just terrific. I have enjoyed this so much. And I think, as a takeaway, one of the things that came out of the data and the Giving USA is the increased need for just being flexible, maximizing on technology, continuing the basics of keeping your donors close and meaningfully engaging volunteer leaders. It comes down to meeting, as you said, meeting people where they are and bringing them along with you and building trust and continuing to go where things are going. We can't predict things as we used to. We now know. So
we have to be flexible. We have to
flexibility is the key.
Yeah, it's the key. And Dan, you highlighted a number of unprecedented convergences of uncertainties during your presentation. Certainly one potential threat that we're all focused on and hearing about in the news is that of a recession. When you reflect on historical philanthropic behavior during times of recession, what assumptions and/or learnings can you bring forward to inform how development professionals should approach their work today?
Wow. Well, so for sure, as I think everyone here would know, right? Giving is what an economist would call pro-cyclical, right? So in good times it goes up, and in bad times it goes down. It's astoundingly pro-cyclical, actually. Over 100 years, it's at the fraction of GDP. There was a picture that Karen showed at the start. That was that fraction of GDP. It's a remarkably consistent fraction going back decades. So it's really, really pro-cyclical. But I think, and again, I would guess that that my fellow panelists could say even better than I could, that this most recent recession, so unusual in so many ways, one of the things I thought it really highlighted was that even in tough times, and even when we face huge uncertainties and huge economic downturns, there are big opportunities to find people who are willing and able to step in and help. And so that lesson I thought was more clearly demonstrated by this most recent recession. And hopefully we won't have any more recessions anytime soon to learn any more lessons from.
Well, you know, there are some things that always, I would hope we could say we will never have, but certainly not the kind that we're in right now, right? Where there's just so much going on at one time. You know, there are a couple of questions in the chat that I like to just lift up. Someone put in the chat, how do you deal with donors' different definitions of what's good for society? Especially now in this moment, as we kind of look at what's going on in the world and the view that people are bringing from different either political ideologies or economic ideologies. Any thoughts on how do we navigate? This is for any of the panel. How do we navigate that conversation with our donors in an authentic way and values driven?
You know, I'll start
Yeah.
and just share, you know, it's going to be, a lot of it is going to be based on the relationship you have with that potential donor or who their circle, where their ecosystem is. But there are a couple of books that I'm going to, hopefully I get the title correct. And if anyone knows me, I never show up without a book recommendation, but these two books, one of them is called The Perfect Gift, and it was edited by Amy Cass. And she also has another book, Doing Well and Doing Good, I believe. Check that out. And if anyone is really interested, I can look at my bookshelf and give you the correct title. But this is a compilation of articles, everything from the Bible through to present times, to the Dalai Lama, different spiritual and religious teachers who have contributed to this question of what is, whether the gift should be focused on the giver or the recipient. And sometimes approaching this question of what's good, if you come at it from a place of storytelling, again, curiosity, and examples in your own personal life, you have a better opportunity to keep the discussion going and understand that that giving is a process, and talking and understanding what is good and how to affect change in a way that makes sense to you and is aligned with your values is a process. So what's most important is that you keep the discussion open. Maybe you'll be in a position to change hearts and minds, or maybe the question was not posed in that sense or for that reason. So as long as you are open to having these conversations and not shutting it down and approaching it from a place of curiosity, I think you'll have an opportunity to make some headwinds. And check out some of these stories and articles in the two books that I referenced.
Well, Margaret, I believe you're going to have to give us your reading list. It's been requested in the chat.
Please.
So let's put that together and we can get it back out.
Yeah, that's a good idea, because
Yeah.
there have been a couple of people who have asked, and it would be great if we could just send it out to everyone.
Yeah, that would be great.
Yeah.
Thank you so much,
And-
Marco.
Yeah, just to add to that, so a couple other, I don't know their books off the top of my head, And even in one, I don't know the author, but, kind of Seth Godin is kind of has some really good, kind of literature out there just around marketing and really thinking of this idea of tribes. And so, people like to belong to tribes. That's how we organize ourselves. And I think in some ways, as an organization, are you telegraphing for folks what it is that you're about so that you can find those donors who are aligned on your values, right? So one, really great phrase and just a way to sum it up and a challenge and an exercise for any organization is to complete the sentence. People like us do things like blank. And so I think, if you're able to, kind of define that, then I think, and broadcast that, then you will bring people who are aligned with that. I think the other thing that I'll note, and I forget, I just went to at AFP Icon, he was there at a session. I went to a session, but around behavioral economics. And one of the things that I learned was, and years ago too, is the idea of how to overcome confirmation bias. And to look at, kind of, it's not that people consciously look at information and throw away what doesn't support their thinking. It's that their brain actually isn't capable of organizing or categorizing that information. So if their brain is a bookshelf and there's not a shelf for the information that you're giving them, then it'll just go away. So then I think you got to find connections, and that's where analogies do a good job. I'll just give a quick example of working with a donor. I was working on homeless issues, on unhoused, kind of helping unhoused individuals get housed. And, to them, it was the problem is that they don't have jobs. And I said, no, the problem is that they don't have houses, or they don't have homes. And so what we ended up doing was I said, tell me what the second thing in second field you have to fill out in a job application is. And they thought about it and they said, wait a minute, name, permanent address. And I said, yes. So how much harder is it for someone to get a job when they're unhoused than when they're housed? And all of a sudden I was making a connection. And for them, it was like, oh, right. It is about jobs, but in order to get the job, they need to get the home. So just sort of thinking through some ways that you can do some of that mental judo is also good.
Thank you so much. Karen, did you want to just say something really quickly before I close us out?
I think that it's important to understand that people's values are aligned with their giving as well. And so when we try to say, this is what's good for society, yes, we have our interpretation of that, and a donor might have another. And truly, it's understanding the values of the donor and aligning the values of the mission with what is meaningful to that donor. And that is really the secret to making great matches and facilitating great relationships between the donor and the mission of the organization.
Thank you. And I'll just say, it's certainly true that there are challenges, but at the same time, there are opportunities and a lot of optimism. And I'm really encouraged by the fact that there has never been so many people in so many different ways prepared to give it a go. So again, thank you, Marguerite. Thank you, Marco. Thank you, Dr. Dan Hungerman. Thank you, Karen. And thank all of you for being with us this afternoon. Lucinda, anything else you want to share before in this last minute?
Yeah, just a couple of reminders. Karen mentioned this earlier, but we are proud and happy to share that we can offer a 30% discount for any of the Giving USA materials, the book, the full report, the book itself, any other materials. If you go to givingusa.org and use our code, which is Alford, you'll receive that 30% discount, and we're happy to offer that to everybody today. A couple other just logistical reminders. You'll get an email from us within 24 hours with a link to this recording that you can use for your own purposes and share with others. And once we conclude here in just a second, you'll be immediately prompted to complete a short survey, and we would appreciate your feedback. So it's really short, it's 4 questions, and that would really help us in planning our future events. If we were unable to answer your question today, please contact us. Our contact information is here on the screen. Our email is info@alford.com, and we would be happy and welcome to the continuation of the conversation offline as well.
But thank you, everyone, and keep going. Keep doing the great work, and thank you for joining us this afternoon. Have a
Yes,
great day.
thank you so much.
Thank
We'll
you.
now disconnect. Have a really, really great day. Thank you.
Bye-bye.